Man, the chimpanzee and the gorilla are so similar that it is practically impossible to tell them apart. Absurd, you say. Gorillas are hairy giants of the forest, weighing half a ton, and chimps, though smaller, are no less hairy. As for man, he walks upright, for one thing, has a large brain, and is naked. The three couldn't be easier to distinguish. But, if you were to look only at their DNA, you would find it a hard task indeed to separate man from the chimpanzee and the gorilla. The three species share almost 99% of their DNA, and on that basis, surely, they should not look nearly as different as they do. There is only just 1% difference between ourselves and a chimp or gorilla. Yet that 1% accounts for all of human civilization, art, literature, and science. How can such a small difference have such major implications? This is one part of the puzzle of human origins, the search for the magic ingredient that makes us special. Common sense tells us that man, with his cities and societies, simply cannot really be so closely related to the African apes. Or can he? Until the 1980s, paleontologists argued that man has been evolving separately from the apes for at least 20 million years. That was the date favored by most paleontologists, and although there was some disagreement between them, with some preferring a slightly earlier date and others a later one, it is fair to say that by and large they agreed that man and the apes have been biologically separate for rather a long time. Separate species means separate evolution, and the chance for DNA to accumulate separate differences. Ignoring man for the moment, tests on every other species investigated show that the longer two species have been separated, in evolutionary terms, the more differences there are in their respective DNA. Changes in DNA occur from time to time by chance, the accident of mutation, and there is a good correlation between genetic difference, measured by comparing DNA from two species, and time. For example, in all other species that have been separated for about 20 to 25 million years, such as the dog and the raccoon, this kind of test reveals accumulated differences equivalent to about 12% of their DNA. But man, the chimps, and the gorilla, who according to the established story of human evolution were also supposed to have been separated for about 20 million years, differ by, in round terms, a mere 1%. By comparison with other species, a genetic difference of this amount ought to correspond to a separation of man and the African apes from a common stock less than 4 million years ago. What is going on? Are we to assume that man is a special case that does not obey the same rules as the millions of other species that share the earth? Or could it be that the paleontologists might have been wrong? Perhaps man and the apes have not been evolving down separate paths for 20 million years or so, but have indeed been separate for only a fifth of that time, less than 4 million years. This is still a hard idea to accept, not least for the paleontologists whose wisdom it challenges. But it makes a lot more sense to assume that man is like all the other inhabitants of the earth, and if necessary to rewrite paleontological history, than to argue that man is a special case, alone in a crowd of animals. The traditional paleontological history was based on very slender fossil evidence. Molecular studies provide new factual evidence, the most significant development in the study of evolution since Charles Darwin came up with the idea of natural selection. And, to the astonishment of most non-paleontologists, and the embarrassment of the paleontologists themselves, it turns out that there are no known fossils which actually contradict the molecular evidence for mankind's only recent origins. Treating man as a special case is a technique with a long tradition, but we are not interested in tradition, only in discovering the revelations that emerge from scientists' newfound ability to read genes and DNA almost as easily as you are reading this page. Ultimately, the history of evolution is written not in fossils of long-dead animals but in the genetic material of species alive today, all of which share a common descent. The differences between their genes show how mutations have accumulated, and we would be foolish to ignore them in our search for the origins of man.